Chapter 7 Morning Girl. No one had died. The storm had damaged nothing that could not be built again. Who needed a roof when the sun shone so friendly or when the stars glowed overhead watching our sleep? The wind had cleared a new path across the island, wide and open, and all along it, the old was suddenly new, made clean, set out in a different way. Father, Mother, and I followed the wind's trail to find Starboy tucked in the arms of the tree where the new sister stayed with grandfather. When we told grandmother what had happened, how my brother had been caught and protected, her smile took over her whole face, squeezing shut her small, dark eyes and pushing her chin into her chest when she bowed her head. She told us that grandfather had once saved father, too, long ago, from a shark, which was how he got his old man's name, Fast Arms. People from other families couldn't remain at their homes. Our houses didn't stay put, they joked when they passed us. Why should we? How easy it was that first long day to gather what we needed. The palms were already spread on the ground, perfect for thatch. Coconuts lay where they had fallen, and even in some unexpected places. Large puddles or places where the ponds had spilled over their banks, silverfish carried from the sea could amazingly be found. The high tides had left the beach flat and smooth, and beyond, the water was tipped with gold where the sun patted the rippling waves. Of course, there was much work to be done, but not on the first day, Father decided, and not on the second either. Instead, he said this was a chance to be happy together, to dance and make music on hollow logs, to watch ball games, to sing goodbye to the wind, and to share the food that had been presented to us as its apology. It was the time for each person to tell a story, to act it out while the rest of us held our heads in fear or covered our mouths when the laughter grew too strong to contain. Mother found dry sticks and poured fire from her pot, then roasted some sweet potatoes in a pit she dug in the ground. Starboy and I searched among the trees, looking under branches and drooping leaves to find fruit that had not burst. I tried not to count or notice that I found 3 more than he did. After all, my arms were longer, and anyway, I knew his story would be better than mine. A large crowd of grandparents, adults, children, and babies had already assembled near the digging stick, the place where the land rocks curve into the ocean. I was shy at first because of seeing so many people at once. That almost never happened except when there was a marriage or when someone died. Another thing was different too, though for a while I couldn't place what it was. Then I knew. The wind had swept away most of the tiny bugs, the ones that were ale-mouthed, the ones that ate and were never full. Usually, when the air was still, people had to burn smudge fires or rub ashes and soot on their bodies to discourage the appetites of those bugs. At such times, we turned into a gray people, except for our hair and lips and eyes. But today, we were bright as wet shells, each person painted and decorated differently. Some wore flattened gold leaves in their earlobes. Some placed hibiscus blooms in their hair or hung long necklaces of shells around their necks. Wherever I looked, there was food, food, food. All the secret recipes from each family there to taste. More food than I had ever seen. Starboy, probably because he was so sure his adventure would be admired, was not timid. He raced ahead of us with his hands open and took some wonderful thing to eat from each mat he passed. I didn't think much of this. I was used to my brother being a child, and he was simply behaving the way a child behaves. No worse than that. I remembered when I could run free, not worrying that I might appear foolish. And there was a part of me that wished I could join Starboy now, do whatever I wanted with no aunts or uncles' eyes to correct me or to embarrass Mother by staring at me too hard. I had received those looks only once, and that had been too much, more than enough to remind me that, though I had not yet become a woman, I was no longer a child. And then, as I watched, I realized that Starboy was not a child anymore either, that he had become too old for such play in public, and I saw all around him those terrible looks pointed at him. Now he'll learn, I thought, with more rightness than kindness. But Starboy didn't notice. His eyes were full of the surprise of not blowing away. Too proud, too excited, a big boy, Never Cry, spoke the word I was thinking. Hungry, Never Cry called to my brother. You're well named. A few people laughed and didn't even cover their mouths. Father touched Mother's arm just above her elbow. Her lips pressed together, and I knew how she felt. How could Starboy be wrong on so fine a day? I'm not hungry anymore, my brother told Nevercry, loud enough for all to hear. He was so pleased with himself that he hadn't understood. I'm Starboy now because my uncle, Sharptooth, interrupted. The wind still must be flowing, he said to Father. It mixes words and meanings. I thought I heard your little Hungry say he had a grown boy's name, but look, he's the same as ever, the same as he's always been. My brother stopped where he was. His hands were filled with food he couldn't drop and waste. There was a fresh honey smeared on his chin. He closed his eyes, then opened them. He looked at me. I don't know how long we stood that way, but it was as if just the two of us were there. I was aware of the sounds of babies, of waves, of the birds as they flapped their wings above the food, but I heard them through deep water. Starboy and I reached across the space between us. We made a fishing line with our eyes, and each pulled the other to the center. Food, I sang, loud as my voice would reach. Food, I'm so hungry, I can't wait any longer to eat. I ran through the crowd, following the path my brother had broken, sampling and reaching like the youngest child, filling my mouth until I couldn't talk, until I reached Starboy. It was so quiet I could hear my mouth chewing. Let us eat, called Father behind me. This family is hungry. We forgot food while we searched for our son Starboy, who watches over us during the night. Now our stomachs rule our brains. I turned and glanced up quickly, watched as Father took a fruit in each hand and lifted them to his face. The juice ran down his chest as he took a bite after bite. Perhaps you are not hungry, little Sharptooth, my mother said to her brother, because you slept when the wind passed over. Or perhaps you are not hungry because you already are too heavy for even a hurricane to lift. But me, I am hungry. Me too, growled the voice of grandmother off to the side where I stood staring at the ground before my feet. And me, said our neighbor, I swam too far, who had helped us search for Starboy. The tide had changed, and people began to look at my uncle instead of at my brother and me. For a moment, his face grew full of the anger that comes from being wrong. But then, swift as yesterday's rain had departed, he set it free. Starboy, Sharptooth called, bring me some sweet lemon and find me coconut to drink. Let me be the first to know your story so that I can introduce my nephew by his proper name when you tell everyone else what happened. Names are strange and special gifts. There are names you give to yourself and names you show to the world. Names that stay for a short while and names that remain with you forever. Names that come from things you do and names that you receive as presents from other people. No one would forget that my brother had once been hungry, but today they would listen for who he had become. And Starboy, too, would remember that he was now older, that he could no longer behave as a child. If your name is true, it is who you are. I swallowed the last of the food in my mouth and lifted my eyes. Starboy had not moved. If it's all right, I whispered to him, go. And he did, finally, but not before he spoke so that only I could hear. Not before he had called me the name he would always afterward use when we were alone together. Not before he had said so softly, the one who stands beside.